One were to make an argument like that.
Consolidation.
Oh, I'm sure this has nothing to do with Israel.
Outraged, a coalition led by the Congressional Black Caucus initiates a challenge to the bill and proposes a bill of their own, where it calls the United States a country for all its citizens. But the Speaker of the House unilaterally disqualifies the bill before it's allowed to even be debated. Why? The House General Counsel explains in a statement, "The bill includes several articles that are meant to alter the character of the United States from the nation-state of white people to a state in which there is equal status from the point of view of nationality for whites and people of color." The bill is dead. America, the nation-state of white people, passes through both chambers of Congress unchallenged. It's then signed into law. U.S. President Joe Biden would invoke the law in a tweet a year later, saying, "America is not a state of all its citizens. According to the nation-state law we passed, America is the nation-state of white people, and not anyone else." As one rights group put it, "There is no democratic constitution in the world that designates the constitutional identity of the state on racial grounds, as serving one ethnic group. There is now." This disconcerting scenario is anything but. It's completely real, and happened just a few years ago to little coverage and little condemnation.
Man, that's crazy, dude. What? No. Guys, you don't understand. It's complicated. I got to keep repeating this point over and over again in an effort to make sure that I can appeal to my liberal sensibilities, to make sure that, like, people understand it's complicated. It's complicated that this is a real thing that happened in Israel.
You've probably heard the phrase, Israel is an apartheid state. But what does that really mean? Apartheid is an Afrikaans word meaning apartness. It was the name of a policy of racial discrimination and separation in South Africa, which lasted from the late 1940s into the 1990s. South Africa's apartheid government was roundly condemned by the international community, and as a result, a long series of conventions and statutes led to its firm prohibition under international law. In fact, the UN General Assembly has condemned it as a crime against humanity since as far back as 1968. In 1973, the General Assembly adopted the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. The high contracting parties to the Geneva Conventions designated apartheid a grave breach, a protocol which went into effect in 1979, and the Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court, outlawed it as well. Indeed, apartheid is an extraordinary crime, in the same category as slavery and genocide. In fact, the 1973 convention uses language straight from the Genocide Convention. The various conventions and statutes differ in their language, but the areas in which they overlap include the following. There exists an institutionalized regime of systematic racial oppression and discrimination. The regime was established with the intent to maintain the domination of one racial group over another, and the regime features inhumane and inhuman acts committed as an integral part of the regime. Virtue-signaling left-wing liberal rags like The Atlantic and the New York Times lecture us on racism in America, but when covering Israel, absolutely zero mention of not the plight of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, but within Israel proper. A common retort to the charge of apartheid in Israel is that 20% of Israel's population is Palestinian.
The worst lie is this. Israel...
That's the worst lie, bro. Actually. Yeah. I hate how bad that lie is. I'm always thinking about how that's the worst lie ever told.
Is an apartheid state.
These are citizens of Israel who can vote in elections.
And even are represented in all branches of Israeli government.
Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, shit. Before I forget, also, that's like new and improved since 1967. Those guys lived under military mandate before 1967. Just want to point that out real quick, too, because it's like, whenever these motherfuckers are like, yeah, actually, have you considered that maybe Palestinian citizens of Israel exist? That's 23% of the population. Look at us. We're so good. We're so magnanimous. We let these fucking Muslims and Christians into the country even. And it's like, yeah, you did, because they didn't leave. And also, you know, they were literally not allowed to be represented in the same court system until 1967. And then also on top of that, still have still openly are disenfranchised legally in ways that if you put it into law in the United States of America, everyone would be like, what the fuck? This is the most insanely racist thing you've ever said.
Can hold public office. They enjoy all the freedoms of their Jewish counterparts. Israel, therefore, is not an apartheid state. Setting aside what should be a glaring omission, that is the occupied Palestinian territories, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, millions of people that are suspiciously left out. I wonder why. No, for a moment, let's discuss these slightly less than 2 million Palestinian Arabs who live in Israel proper. Israel is unique in the world for its sophisticated information apparatus. And with its spokesperson's unit, Israel is able to write word for word much of the script that Western news outlets read from. It can be hard to know what is fact and what is fiction. By using Ground News, my go-to media tool, I can compare headlines and get additional context the mainstream media doesn't provide. This app and website combines thousands of sources from around the world and shows things like political bias, factuality, and source ownership. Of course, I've been following updates on Israel and Palestine, and this story piqued my attention. Israel's encirclement of Gaza City tightens as top U.S. diplomat arrives to push for humanitarian aid. On the website, we see that over 150 sources have covered it, and it's pretty evenly covered by the right and center. Looking closer, the Times of Israel, a left-leaning source based in Jerusalem, focuses on drones finding hostages held by Hamas. On the right, I even noticed articles from Russian state-owned media. I think what Ground News is doing is really important, and I encourage you to check it out. Go to ground.news/GDF. Subscribe through my link for as little as $1 a month or 40% off unlimited access. And support my channel in the meantime. The story begins in 1948.
Left, Times of Israel being left. I mean, technically, they're not as leftist as Haaretz, but yeah, they are. Technically, Times of Israel is also, like, liberal-ish, I would say.
50,000 Arabs have vanished from what is now the State of Israel. Some say they were forced out. Some say they left on their own.
Yeah.
Many say it was a mixture of both. Maybe for argument's sake, I'll grant that every single Palestinian left on their own.
Roughly 90% of the population was expelled.
With all of these Palestinians now gone, the State of Israel begins a campaign of systematic destruction of Palestinian homes through demolition and forestation, the planting of trees in villages, making them uninhabitable. In 2019, Haaretz reported on the practice using declassified Israeli documents. Whether the Palestinians were forced out or left on their own, no matter, the destruction of homes ensured that they had...
Guys, you don't understand. This was like, this was, don't think about it too much. You know what I mean? You're over here acting like this is a big deal, but this is small bean Israel. They had to do it. They just had to literally, maliciously plant fucking trees that are not even, that are not even organically there, to like Europeanize and completely eviscerate like invasive species that are not supposed to be there, to eviscerate the native trees, like the olive trees. Very weird.
Had no place to come back to, which under international law is still forced displacement. One example is representative of the broader
Yeah, they literally raise money for the trees to this day. They have birthright trip takers plant them, making people unknowingly complicit in this
trend. In 1948, the Israeli military ordered the northern village of Ikrit, with a population of 600, to leave temporarily.
This is a temporary measure.
They didn't actually cross the border, but relocated just several kilometers away. But they were never allowed to return. The residents sued for the right to return, and actually won. Israel's Supreme Court ruled in their favor. However, the Israeli Ministry of Defense refused to implement the decision, fearing it would create a precedent. In 1951, the Ministry of Defense...
Wait, what? Oh, that's weird. Why wouldn't they? I don't get it. Why would that be a problem? Why wouldn't that... Why would that be a dangerous precedent? By the way, both secular institutions, the IDF, also a secular institution, so is the Supreme Court.
Blew up all the remaining houses in the village. To this day, the Ikrit community numbers 1,500, who live just 20 kilometers away in Ramah. And to this day, they continue to fight for their right to return to their homes. In 1950, the State of Israel passed the Absentees Property Law, which the state used to claim all the land of all the Palestinians who had fled their homes as a result of the war, regardless of whether they fled to another country or were internally displaced. And to this day, they are still prohibited from accessing and using land and property that belonged to them or their families in 1948. From 1948 to 1966, the first 16 years of Israel's existence, Palestinians living in its borders were placed under military rule. The state used extraordinary emergency powers to confiscate property and close entire villages as military zones, confining Palestinians to dozens of enclaves. They were tried in military courts and required permits to leave their cordoned-off areas. They banned protests and political parties. You know, like the West Bank today. According to Haaretz, Israel lifted its military rule over the state's Arab community in 1966 only after ascertaining that its members could not return to the villages they had fled or been expelled from. By the time military rule was lifted, Israel had completed its initiative of destroying Palestinian homes and making them uninhabitable. The damage was done. This bears similarities to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which some Americans believe was the end of systemic racial discrimination in the United States.
At what point did we stop being racist? Was when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, or when?
Yeah, I would say after the Civil Rights Act.
So the day
that everyone was given. No, I mean systemically, yeah.
Although, of course, by the mid-1960s, following decades of discriminatory practices such as the Federal Housing Administration's whites-only requirement, the damage was already done. The United States was already largely segregated by neighborhoods of predominantly white single-family homes in suburbs and multifamily complexes in neighborhoods deliberately zoned by race. The same way that the segregation of American neighborhoods is visible to the present, the facts on the ground in Israel are quite a staggering dose of reality. Today, Arabs control just 3% of state land in Israel, despite making 20% of the population. The 90% of Palestinians who live in these areas...
Wait, so weird. How did that happen? I'm sure that if they had enough money, they could buy more land, right? Right? Certainly, since they have, so it's not an apartheid state, right? They could just simply buy more land. Certainly, there's no rules, literally to this day, that legally allow a Jewish enclave to forcibly expel Arabs from their communities if they would choose to do so, right?
Experience higher rates of poverty, lower levels of labor force participation, educational attainment, and health. 50% of the Arab population live below the poverty line. Further, only 2% of industrial zones in Israel, which generate a significant tax income, are located in these Palestinian areas. The 10% of remaining Palestinians live in so-called mixed cities, but even then, they are usually relegated to separate neighborhoods. But why don't they move? Unlike most industrialized countries, in Israel, the state controls 93% of the land, either directly or indirectly through quasi-national bodies such as the Jewish National Fund. In 2011, the Knesset passed the Communities Acceptance Law, which established admissions committees in Jewish communities to screen applicants based on their social suitability or their unsuitability to the community's social and cultural fabric. This enables discrimination, primarily against Arabs, but also against Mizrahi Jews, Ethiopian Israelis, or anyone whom residents of the privileged community fear will lower the value of their homes. The 2011 law stipulated that these admissions councils were limited to towns with 400 residents, though this rule was repeatedly broken. Regardless, in 2023, the law was expanded to towns with 1,000 residents. Today, admissions committees operate in 53 regional councils, which control 81% of state land in Israel. Arabs are, in practice, barred from leasing land in 80% of the land in the state of Israel. For more than 15 years, the residents of el-Haran have been waging a legal...
Yikes. Seems kind of... Yikes. Seems kind of awkwardly racist, it seems. Like, remember when everyone was talking about the Palestinian citizens of Israel and how there's a guy in the Supreme Court who's Arab, right? There's military officials that are Arab, like in the IDF. Like, come on, how could you say it's an apartheid? This part doesn't seem too good, though, I think.
Battle to save their village, which is slated for demolition. In 2017, Israeli forces attempted to evacuate el-Haran by force and began demolishing homes. Yaqub Abu al-Kiyan, a 47-year-old Arab-Israeli citizen, was shot and killed. The Israeli police allowed no medical assistance for 3 hours. Afterward, officers suppressed evidence of his innocence, and Benjamin Netanyahu accused him of being a terrorist, which he had to retract later on after a Shin Bet investigation cleared him of wrongdoing. After the incident, the plan to remove the villagers was paused, but resumed in 2022. The new village being built, which will take its place, will simply be called Hiran. Hiran's cooperative association bylaws state an individual may be approved by the admissions if they meet the following qualifications: a Jewish Israeli citizen or permanent resident of Israel who observes the Torah and commandments according to Orthodox Jewish values. A similar fate doubtless awaits the thousands of homes which are demolished in the south of Israel every year. Home demolitions do not just occur in the West Bank, but in Israel proper as well. Attempts to challenge these discriminatory laws and uphold Palestinian rights are met with further difficulties. In Israel, political parties are illegal if they deny the existence of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, under the 1992 Law on Political Parties. Under the 1958 Knesset Basic Law, any political candidate can be disqualified for negation of the existence of the State of Israel as the state of the Jewish people, negation of the democratic character of the state, or incitement to racism. In Israel, BDS is out of the question. Though not a criminal offense to call for boycott, you are legally open to civil suit or sanctions under the 2011 boycott law. That same year, the Knesset approved Fundamentals of Finance Amendment No. 40, which has been called the Nakba Law. Under this law, the state can withhold funding for government institutions that commemorate the Nakba.